Welcome back to Come Home to You. I'm your host, Jenny Swim, and I am so glad you would join me today. Today, we're going to focus in on a really small principle or practice that has huge impact. Think about that moment where you have an aha experience, where something was fuzzy or clouded, or you couldn't quite put your finger on it, and all of a sudden, everything falls into place. The puzzle becomes clear. You can see the overall vision. You know the next step to take. What happens between that chaos and that fog to that crystallized moment of focus and knowing of how to move forward? I'm calling that the power of identification. There's a moment where you can put a name on something, where you recognize what something is that transforms this moment of cycling or wondering or fog into this aha experience. Let me give you an example. So this summer, I decided to grow a blueberry bush, and I was really excited to have blueberries for breakfast. The problem was, a few weeks into my experiment, this stalk just started to grow on this blueberry plant. Every time I'd look at it, I'd think, is that a weed or is that a plant? I wasn't sure because I'd never actually grown a blueberry bush before. I kept meaning to do something about it. I kept meaning to identify it, to download one of the plant identification apps, and I never did. I just continued to let it sit and grow and really kind of bug me inside. It was like that rock in your shoe that just kind of keeps grating on you, but you're not taking the time to stop and pull off your shoe and drop those pebbles on the floor. Finally, at the end of the summer, I pulled out the plant identifier app, and sure enough, it was a blueberry stalk. But why did it take me so long to access that power of identification? That's something many of us struggle with, right? We don't take the time to pause and recognize what is happening so we can move from that awareness into that productive action, getting to that aha place that tips the scale, and then the dominoes can roll forward. In what way can you relate with my story of this blueberry bush? This inaction, this cycling, and the moment when you decide to stop and identify something, to take the time, to make the effort, to put yourself in a position to have the tools you need, perhaps the support or the environment you need to access the identification so you can move forward to whatever that next step is for you. So today we're going to talk about why this practice of identification can be a game changer, both personally and professionally. We'll cover where we might use this practice of identification and practical tools to enhance your ability to identify something. And I'm sure you're already doing this in your everyday life. We go through our life and we easily categorize things in our mind. It happens so quickly that we often don't pause to recognize that a big part of what we do in a day that helps us create order and maintain momentum and feel safe is that we categorize things, we organize things, we label things. I know that I'm pulling out pancake mix and not flour because there's a label on it or there's a box around it that helps me understand this. Now, our caveat for today with this practice of identification is that we're not so much focusing on identity. We want to be able to identify without it becoming our identity. And oftentimes when we move from a place of awareness that something's happening into this naming space where we actually name or identify what is present with us, we can easily own it, judge it, become one with it, and it can get a little bit sticky. Today, I'm going to invite a new concept or a new idea of being able to identify something while still maintaining some of that distance, where we're able to observe what might be present with us without over-owning or becoming that thing. So, for example, if I'm feeling anxiousness, I could note, anxiousness is here with me right now. But I may stop short of saying, I'm just an anxious person. Now, maybe your experience is that you have a lot of anxiety in your life and this shows up for you often. That's fine. You can say, I experience anxiousness a lot, but I'm still allowing myself to have a different experience when I don't over-identify with that. The same thing goes for dysfunction in a team, right? Maybe I recognize there is dysfunction in this team, but I am not saying, wow, I'm the person who just brings dysfunction everywhere I go. What do I need to understand about that? What do I need to identify about that? But we're stopping short of making it who we are. So that's my caveat today. As we work on this principle of practicing identifying, we want to take advantage of the order, the organization, the clarity, the energy that creates, but we're going to leave aside the judgment and the identity piece of that. So an invitation to recognize what is here with you versus who you are because this is here. Okay, as we jump in today, I want to start out with a great story from the professional space. Many of you know Airbnb, and they went through this kind of fog experience where they had an awareness that something was off in their organization. They weren't getting bookings, their sales were low, they didn't know what was wrong. Maybe some of you can relate with that, where you're having an outcome you don't like, but you're not really sure what is the cause of that outcome. What am I doing on the X side of the equation that's giving me the Y? As Airbnb founders got really clear on identifying the problem that was causing this outcome they didn't want, they recognized that it was really important to people to have good photos. In fact, if a person looks at a listing and they see a photo that's dark or unprofessional, it can look a bit dodgy or a bit dangerous even, and people don't really want to book or stay in that location. A professional photo of the same listing can make such a huge difference in how someone relates with that listing. When the founders took professional photos, they saw a 2 to 3 times increase in booking, and their revenue doubled in 1 month. So clearly this had a big impact. They really figured out what the issue was. And once they identified it, they could move out of this fog of, we're not sure what's wrong here, into this place of action. Typically, as we talk in Come Home to You, we've recognized that our intelligence is constantly gathering signals. And so oftentimes we do have an awareness. We have an awareness that something is present. But until we name what it is, we don't move from awareness to action. We're kind of stuck with this gap in between because I don't know what to make of the data. I haven't labeled this data as giving me any sort of action movement. So, for instance, I might notice there's some pushback in a meeting that I'm having. I'm just noticing pushback, and I can recognize that, but I haven't identified what's causing that pushback. What is actually here? Does someone feel unheard? Is there a misalignment in vision? Does someone not have the data they need? Once I recognize and identify that bridge point, I can move from an awareness of what's here to getting to an action that actually helps me find the right result. It's interesting to note, oftentimes when people come in for coaching, they'll offer, here's the thing I want to work on. Here's the problem that I'm facing. Almost always, the very first problem is not the one that they ultimately find is the root concern. What do I mean by that? Maybe someone comes in and says, I really want to get a different job, and I want your help identifying where I want to work and what my strengths are. Great. I'm here to help them with whatever they want. But as we dig down deeper and ask some identifying questions, almost always there's something that they find that allows them to recognize, oh, actually, I'm not accepting myself. Or actually, I don't know what I want. Or actually, I have a belief that I don't belong anywhere, and I need to really work that belief. I've seen this over and over. So what do? How do we really embrace this power of identification to change our outcomes to help us build that bridge between awareness and action? We're going to talk about 3 whys today. So the first reason that identification is a game changer is that it turns vague data into usable information. Imagine with me, you're watching your favorite detective crime show, and you're watching those detectives put pieces of data on that evidence board. Every time they get a lead, every time they have an interview with someone, every time they gather forensic data, they are placing it on this board to start to make sense and paint a picture of what happened. And hopefully their efforts allow them to get to that coherence, to solve the mystery, to take the action needed to bring a criminal to justice. What happens in our bodies is that we also have all of these signals coming in. Maybe the signals matter. Maybe they should go on the evidence board. Maybe they don't matter. Maybe they're just superfluous data. But we don't know until we start to name and identify those signals. For instance, maybe I feel tension in my chest, or irritation in a meeting, or excitement about a new idea. Those are all just signals that are playing underneath the surface of my whole person system. But once I pause to say, oh, this is anxiety in my chest, or oh, that was misalignment in that meeting, or this is enthusiasm. This feeling I feel is enthusiasm about that idea. If I don't pause to do that, then those signals remain noise. So that noise becomes a problem because it clogs our communication channels and it decreases our focus. It allows that fog that we might be feeling to really cloud our ability to take in good data and also to offer clear communication to others. If you find yourself noticing a lot of data in your system and you're struggling to get past the noise and to decipher what are these signals and do I need these signals, you may be interested in Dan Siegel's work called Name It to Tame It. And I've talked about this on episode 14, Turn Struggle into Strength, the art and science of processing difficult emotions. So you can go back there, catch a little bit more about Dan and his research. But for the purposes of today, his research showed that when you name an emotion, your body releases a calming neurotransmitter that soothes how you're feeling. All you have to do is name the emotion. Similarly, when we go around and we're able to be specific about what's happening in our space, when we observe something, when we name what is here, we can feel that calming in our systems and start to decipher the signals we want to keep and the signals we can let go of. We turn that vague data into usable information. The second reason why the practice of identification can be such a game changer is it helps us see things as they really are. When we don't name what we're feeling or observing, when we don't identify it and it just remains vague, our minds, remember, love coherence, and so we'll fill in the blanks with our assumptions. And oftentimes we'll set aside information that's too uncomfortable to look at. This is normal. This is what we do with some of our cognitive bias. When we identify, we are able to distinguish what's actually true from what we've imagined. Now, this might sound really simple in practice, but imagine that you're in your family system and you're noting there's a lot of conflict here. It can feel really uncomfortable to see that reality, to recognize this is true right now. This is here. I don't want this to be here, right? Or to recognize your health and to pause to look at something that might feel ugly to see or even vulnerable or risky. If you're noting that maybe this may be where you are playing a bit more in your world, you might try an honesty check. And the first question you ask with this is, am I willing to be 100% honest with myself about the situation? And the truth is, if you honestly ask that, you may hear no. And that's okay. If you get a no answer when you're asking yourself honestly, that is information in and of itself. It allows you to bridge the gap between awareness and action because now you know there's something here I don't have capacity to be honest with right now. My system cannot hold it. That is data. That's a win. Now you can move to action. Okay, I'm going to take that to my coach. I'm going to take that to my therapist. I'm going to take that to wherever I need to go to help me surface or become more safe and confident and comfortable with processing what might be here with me. If you are able to ask that question and say, no, I'm ready to be honest, I'm okay to be totally honest with this situation, then you can ask yourself the question, what would I see if I observed the situation with an honest lens? Perhaps there's something in your life right now that needs awareness, that you're being drawn toward, but you still haven't identified what it is. You still haven't found the root concern of what is bothering you, what is here with you, that awareness that is inviting you to take a closer look. If you ask yourself, am I willing to be 100% honest with myself about this situation? What do you hear? What would you see if you observed this situation with an honest lens? As you sit with that, was there information that you gleaned? If this intrigues you and you'd like to focus a little bit more on honest identification and why that's so important, you may consider checking out episode 15, The Spy Within, What Spycraft Teaches Us About Mental Health. In this, a former CIA and FBI counterintelligence agent, David, talks about why accurate identification matters. Okay, our number 3 why for the power of identification is that it releases energy. If any of you have ever been sitting with ambiguity, you recognize that it drains your energy. The mind keeps looping around. And when we name something or identify something, we close that loop and we start to see shape to that fog. When we identify, our whole system is able to rest. It stops spinning to try to understand and solve a problem. And it frees up our focus and our capacity to take corrective or creative action. When we name something clearly, we often also find that our 3 intelligence centers, our head, our heart, our gut, are able to triangulate. They stop fighting each other, and our logic, our intuition, our safety and experience are able to quiet and calm and have that connective feeling. That triangulation system helps us know when we've landed on something. We get that aha moment. Suddenly the fog lifts and the next step becomes visible. Maybe you're thinking, I'm good at naming, check. I am willing to be totally honest with myself, check. But I'm still missing that aha moment. I haven't been able to land what needs to be identified. If that's you, I want to offer another tool, and it's called 5 whys. The idea is that when something surfaces for you, you're able to name that awareness, then ask yourself why 5 different times. And the idea is that each time you ask, you're able to get closer and closer to that root concern so that you can take action and recognize what's really driving whatever is showing up for you. Let me give you an example. So maybe you notice that you come home from work every day and you're not able to relax the same way. You feel irritable at night. You would just surface that and then you'd start asking why. So first, why do you feel irritable every night? Because I feel rushed and behind at the end of the day. Why do you feel rushed and behind at the end of the day? Because my afternoons get filled with last-minute tasks. The third why. Why do your afternoons get filled with last-minute tasks? Because I don't block time for focused work earlier in the day. Why don't you block time for focused work earlier in the day? Because I start the morning reacting to emails instead of making a plan or priority for my day. Why do I do that? Number 5, because I haven't set a morning routine that protects some of the deep work time that I actually need. As I go through this 5 why tool, I can recognize at the end of those questions, my root problem is not irritability. It's a lack of that intentional structure. Of course, I'm going to feel irritable at the end of the day because I've overridden my capacity. I'm not safeguarding that focus that I actually need. So let's think about you. Can you recall a time when you identified what was happening, whether it was in your body, your work, your relationship, and it immediately clarified your next step? Why was that valuable to you? What about that changed things? Today we've been talking about the practice of identification, not identity and who we are, but identifying what is present with us. What situation is here? What thoughts are here? What emotions are here? When we use that in professional settings, it might look like identifying or naming wins, performance indicators, challenges, roles, conflict. When we use identification in a personal setting, it might look like identifying values, dreams, expectations, boundaries, emotions. Naming is what turns that vague emotion or observation into usable information. It stops our mind from spinning and it brings our energy back into alignment. It's what allows teams to problem solve effectively. You can't address what you haven't defined, and you can't fix what no one has named. So naming becomes both this spiritual act of truth-telling and a strategic act of leadership. It helps us see things as they really are. Not how we fear them to be, not how we wish them to be, but how they actually are right now. Because only then can we act wisely and move forward in that action that leads us to what we ultimately want. Let's turn back to you. What in your life or leadership is asking to be named right now? Not analyzed, not judged, not fixed, just named. I want to leave you with a quote by an American author, Bill Rohrback. Quote, "Naming is knowing." End of quote. May we utilize this practice of identification so that we can see things as they really are, and from that have the power to move forward in wise action toward what is most important to us. Thank you for joining me today. I'm so glad you were here. What are you taking away? If there's something that helped you today, I'm going to invite you to pass this episode along to someone else who might find similar benefit. Until we meet again.